Nnamdi Kanu, the leader of the indigenous people of Biafra, IPOB, wrote an open letter stating he would rather die in detention than be tried by a biased court. He rejected Justice Binta Nyako presiding over his case, arguing that she had previously recused herself, leading to mixed reactions online. Southeast politicians have remained silent on his case, despite past claims of negotiating for his release. Nnamdi Kanu revealed that the Department of State Services, DSS, allegedly spends 500 million naira whenever he is transported to court, suggesting corruption. He accused the Nigerian government and judiciary of conspiring to deny him a fair trial since his extraordinary rendition from Kenya in 2021. Past court judgments declared IPOB legal and Nnamdi Kanu's rendition unconstitutional, yet the Nigerian government disregarded them and continued his detention. Nnamdi Kanu criticized how IPOB was labeled a terrorist group through an ex parte ruling without proper legal proceedings. He cited a 2022 court ruling stating that his arrest and detention violated his fundamental rights, dignity and freedom. The Court of Appeal once ruled in his favor, stating no court had jurisdiction over his case due to his illegal rendition, but the ruling was later overturned. Meanwhile, some critics have urged Nnamdi Kanu's supporters to rethink their approach in seeking justice, highlighting that Nnamdi Kanu remains firm in his stance against a biased judiciary. I want to share with you a story that has been echoing in my mind ever since I first heard it. It is a story of defiance, of deep conviction, and of a man's unwavering stand against what he sees as a corrupt system. This story revolves around Nnamdi Kanu, the leader of the indigenous people of Biafra, and an open letter he wrote that sent shockwaves across Nigeria and beyond. When I read his words, I felt as if I were witnessing a powerful drama unfold in real time, a drama where every sentence carried the weight of a battle for justice and freedom. I remember the day clearly. I was scrolling through news updates on my phone when I came across the headline, "I'd rather die than succumb. Nnamdi Kanu writes emotional open letter to the public." At first, I was taken aback by the intensity of the statement. The notion that someone would rather face death in detention than risk standing before a court they believed to be biased was so extreme that it forced me to pause and reflect on what it all meant. I began to read the letter, and as I did, I felt an undeniable gravity in each word, a gravity that seemed to stretch far beyond the confines of a courtroom or a political debate. In his open letter, Nnamdi Kanu made it unmistakably clear that he would rather endure a life behind bars than submit to a trial presided over by a judge or a court that he believed was inherently biased. He specifically rejected the idea of having Justice Binta Nyako, a judge who had previously recused herself from his case, as the presiding officer over his trial. This rejection was not just a procedural objection, it was a profound statement of defiance against what he perceived as an already tainted system. I could sense in his words that for him, this was not a mere legal battle. It was a fight for his very dignity and the rights of those who identified with his movement. Listening to his message, I could not help but feel that Nnamdi Kanu was speaking not only for himself, but also for millions of people who have felt marginalized, misunderstood, or outright oppressed by the state. His words carried a raw, emotional force that left little room for ambiguity. He made it clear that he would rather die in detention than be subjected to what he described as an unjust and corrupt judicial process. This conviction struck me deeply because it resonated with the universal longing for fairness and respect, values that many of us hold dear in our hearts. As I continued reading, I learned more details that painted a broader picture of the complex and often disheartening situation in Nigeria. Nnamdi Kanu revealed an allegation that caught my attention, a claim that every time the Department of State Services, a key security agency in Nigeria, transports him to court, they allegedly spend 500 million naira. To put it in perspective, that amount of money is staggering, and the suggestion that such a huge sum is being funneled into what he describes as a corrupt business really made me stop and think about the state of governance in his country. It was as if every detail he provided was a thread in a larger tapestry of what he saw as systemic corruption and injustice. The story grew even more layered as Nnamdi Kanu recounted his extraordinary rendition from Kenya in the year 2021. His account of being forcibly brought back to Nigeria felt like a scene out of a political thriller, a dramatic and unsettling moment that marked a turning point in his life. According to him, not only was this rendition executed in blatant violation of international laws, but subsequent court judgments had even declared both the rendition and the detention as unconstitutional. Despite these clear legal statements, the Nigerian government continued to hold him in detention. It was almost as if the government and parts of the judiciary had conspired to ignore the very laws that were supposed to protect him. What really struck me was the repeated emphasis on how his rights had been trampled upon. Nnamdi Kanu spoke with a mixture of anger and sorrow as he recalled a federal high court ruling from October 26, 2022. In that ruling, the court declared that his extraordinary rendition and subsequent detention were not only unlawful, but had also violated his fundamental human rights, his dignity, and even posed a threat to his life. To hear that a judge somewhere in Nigeria had acknowledged that his treatment amounted to an inhuman violation of his rights, only to have that ruling disregarded by the government, was deeply unsettling. It made me wonder how many other citizens were silently suffering under similar circumstances without having the courage or the platform to speak out. There was also an important point in his letter about the way his organization, the indigenous people of Biafra, was being treated. He condemned the labeling of the indigenous people of Biafra as a terrorist organization, a designation that, according to him, was based on an ex parte ruling. This ruling was made without the opportunity for him or his organization to present their case properly. To me, this was a clear sign of how the mechanisms of power could be manipulated to serve the interests of those in authority, even if it meant violating the principles of justice and fairness. It was a painful reminder that sometimes, in the corridors of power, the truth can be distorted to fit a narrative that suits those who are already in control. I also recall that the transcript of the open letter was shared widely on social media, including on a video posted by Okocha Happy Marcel on YouTube. In that video, the leader of the indigenous people of Biafra, Nnamdi Kanu, read out his letter in a tone that was both defiant and resolute. I watched intently as he repeated his declaration. "I do rather die in detention than face trial by a biased judge or a corrupt court." His words were filled with a fierce determination, and they seemed to echo the voices of countless individuals who had been wronged by the system. Even though the words were harsh and uncompromising, they also carried an undercurrent of deep, personal pain, a pain that came from years of feeling betrayed by the very institutions that were supposed to protect him. What added another layer of complexity to this story was the reaction, or rather the lack thereof, from certain political figures. In the days following the publication of his letter, there was a noticeable silence from southeast Nigerian politicians. These were the same individuals who had, in the past, boasted about negotiating for his release. Their silence in this critical moment was not lost on Nnamdi Kanu, and he did not hesitate to call them out. He suggested that their inaction and silence were a sign of deep-rooted deception, a betrayal of the people who had once looked to them for support and justice. Listening to him, I could sense his profound disappointment and anger toward these political figures. To him, their silence was not just a political maneuver, it was a personal betrayal. I must admit, as I listened and read, I began to question many of the assumptions I had about power and justice. Here was a man who had dedicated his life to fighting for what he believed was right, a fight that had cost him his freedom, his dignity, and possibly even his life. Yet despite all the adversities he faced, Nnamdi Kanu remained unyielding. His open letter was not merely a legal statement or a political manifesto, it was a deeply personal declaration of identity and resistance. He made it abundantly clear that he would not be cowed into submission by a system he believed was fundamentally unjust, regardless of the cost. I found myself reflecting on the broader implications of his words. In a world where power often goes unchecked, and where the voices of dissent are frequently silenced, Nnamdi Kanu's open letter served as a beacon, a reminder that the struggle for justice is not an abstract concept, but a very real, human fight. His willingness to risk everything rather than compromise on his principles was both inspiring and heartbreaking. It made me think about all those times when ordinary people have had to confront systems that are stacked against them, and how courage in the face of overwhelming odds can sometimes be the only path forward. The story took another dramatic turn when Nnamdi Kanu recounted what he described as a secret regarding his transportation to court. According to him, every time the Department of State Services arranged for his transfer, the government was spending an astronomical sum, 500 million naira. To anyone who is not familiar with the currency and the economic context of Nigeria, that might just be a number. But when you pause to consider the enormity of that amount, it paints a picture of a deeply entrenched system where even the most basic procedures are tainted by corruption. I couldn't help but feel a sense of disbelief that such vast sums of money could be misused in this manner. It was as if the machinery of the state had become less about justice and more about serving the interests of those at the top, regardless of the cost to an individual's freedom or dignity. What struck me even more was the way in which Nnamdi Kanu tied these financial allegations to his broader critique of the government and judiciary. His open letter was, in many ways, an indictment of an entire system. A system where legal processes are manipulated, where rulings are made not on the basis of justice, but on political expediency. He recalled a federal high court judgment from March 17th in Abuja that had once declared that the indigenous people of Biafra was a legal organization. Yet, despite this clear declaration, the government had moved behind closed doors, using secret communications and manipulated legal procedures to label his organization as a terrorist group. The sense of injustice in his voice was palpable as he recounted these events. I found myself sympathizing deeply with his plight, even as I struggled to reconcile the complexities of the legal and political systems at play. In one part of his letter, Nnamdi Kanu mentioned a ruling by the Court of Appeal. This ruling had stated that, because of the illegal manner in which he had been brought from Kenya to Nigeria, no court had the jurisdiction to try him. Imagine the significance of that statement. It was as if a high-level judicial authority had, at least for a moment, recognized that the entire process leading to his detention was fundamentally flawed. However, this ruling was later overturned, and the legal battle continued. To me, this was a microcosm of the struggle between justice and power, a struggle where legal victories can be short-lived in the face of a political establishment that is determined to maintain control, no matter the cost. It is not lost on me that many critics have urged Nnamdi Kanu's supporters to rethink their approach in seeking justice. They have suggested that the relentless pursuit of what they call justice might sometimes lead to even more complications, especially when the legal system is seen as being in the hands of those who are already predisposed against him. Despite these calls for caution, Nnamdi Kanu's stance remains unyielding. His message is clear. He will not submit to a trial that he believes is fundamentally biased. His conviction that he would rather face death in detention than compromise on the principles he stands for resonates with a power that is both awe-inspiring and deeply tragic. I have to admit, as I delved deeper into the details of this case, I felt a growing sense of empathy for Nnamdi Kanu. There is something profoundly human in his struggle, a desire to be treated fairly, to have his voice heard, and to stand up against what he perceives as injustice. In a country like Nigeria, where political maneuvering and corruption seem to lurk around every corner, his determination is a beacon of hope for many who have lost faith in the system. Yet it is also a stark reminder of the cost of dissent, of the price that must sometimes be paid for holding on to one's convictions. I remember watching the video where Nnamdi Kanu himself, in a calm yet resolute tone, repeated his declaration, "I do rather die in detention than face trial by a biased judge or a corrupt court." His words reverberated through the speakers, and I could almost feel the tension and resolve in every syllable. He spoke not only for himself, but for all those who had been marginalized, silenced, or persecuted by the mechanisms of power. It was a call to action, a call for the public to open their eyes to what he described as a systematic abuse of power that had been going on for far too long. In his letter, Nnamdi Kanu also touched on the treatment of his organization by the state. He recounted how, in what he described as a blatant act of executive and judicial fraud, his group was unfairly branded as a terrorist organization. This designation, he argued, was not the result of a fair trial or a transparent legal process, but rather a decision made behind closed doors, one that had severe consequences for not only him, but for millions of people who identified with his cause. The injustice of it all was staggering. Here was a man whose only crime seemed to be his refusal to bow down to an unjust system, yet he was being punished in ways that transcended legal boundaries and struck at the very core of his human rights. There is a moment in his narrative that I found particularly heart-wrenching. Nnamdi Kanu recalled a ruling from the Federal High Court on October 26, 2022, which declared that the manner in which he was apprehended and detained was unconstitutional. The court had stated, in clear and unequivocal terms, that the way he had been forcibly brought back from Kenya, along with the treatment he received thereafter, amounted to a violation of his fundamental rights and dignity. This ruling, in my eyes, was a powerful testament to the truth of his claims. It was as if for one brief moment the law had stood on his side. Yet, despite this judicial acknowledgement of his suffering, the government chose to ignore the ruling, continuing to hold him in detention and subjecting him to further legal and physical ordeals. What makes this whole saga so compelling and at the same time so heartbreaking is the sheer resilience of Nnamdi Kanu. Even in the face of overwhelming odds, when the institutions that were supposed to protect him had instead become instruments of oppression, he stood firm. His open letter was more than just a legal statement. It was a personal manifesto, a declaration of his identity, and a plea for justice. He was not asking for special treatment or favors. He was simply demanding that his rights be recognized and upheld. In a tone that was both humble and unyielding, he made it clear that he would not let anyone, no matter how powerful, strip him of his dignity.
Nnamdi Kanu writes open letter to the public. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining me in this video. After the last court proceedings of Nnamdi Kanu, where he refused that Justice Binta Nyako will not preside over, the case because she have recused herself from the trial. So there have been a lot of misreaction. Some people are saying what Nnamdi Kanu did is very right, and some people are saying he should have just allowed them to try him. So there have been a lot of misreactions on the Nigerian internet space. However, the Southeast politicians have not reacted to it. You can see that you have never seen a public statement from any Southeast politician regarding the trial. They are mute. So they are, I would say that they really know what was about to happen before then, because before now, from last year down, there have been a lot of speculations from them, lying to the general public that they are meeting Tinubu, they are meeting this, they are negotiating for Kanu's release. But when the time to talk now comes, all of them gone mute. So that is the highest deception. If I tell you people not to trust most of the politicians, there are only few of them who are good, okay? Don't trust most of them. This is what it is, because they don't have the integrity. Now, Nnamdi Kanu has come out to say that I do rather die in detention than to face trial by biased judge or court. I do rather die in detention than face trial by biased judge or court. Nnamdi Kanu. Now, what happened? Let us go to the details of this developing news. The detained leader of the indigenous people of Biafra IPOB, Nnamdi Kanu, has declared that he would prefer to remain in detention for the rest of his life rather than to be tried by a corrupt and biased court or judge. Out of the article. You see, one thing I love Nnamdi Kanu for, and you cannot take that away from him, is that he is what he says he is, and he is what people think about him. When he says, I do rather die than to face judgment, than to face trial by a biased judge or court, he knows what he's talking about. And then Nnamdi Kanu don't care how many years or months he stays in detention. What he's after is, it is not Nnamdi Kanu. You can't do this. You can't carry out this called a judicial coup on me. And that is what he has been maintaining. He is bold like lion in the face of his trial. Now, the article continues that Kanu made this statement in an open letter to the public, which he personally signed from his detention at the Department of State Service DSS. The letter was made available through his special counsel, Barrister Andoy Ejemako. Out of the article. Now, I know that the DSS will be happy when they hear that Nnamdi Kanu says, I do rather stay in detention than for me to face trial by a biased court or judge, because Omoyole Sowore told us about a secret that every time DSS is bringing in Nnamdi Kanu to court, they spent 500 million naira. They spent 500 million naira. I think that is a very, very corrupt business, a good corrupt business for that matter. Now, let's continue with this article. Say, Kanu vowed that if it will take the rest of my life in detention to produce me before a proper and impartial court, so be it. Let me repeat that. Kanu vowed that if it will take the rest of my life in detention to produce me before a proper and impartial court, so be it. Now let's continue. But let me say this for the world to know. I will not succumb to any trial conducted by any judge or court whose jurisdiction does not pass constitutional muster. Not now, not ever, he said in the letter. Let me repeat this one still. But let me say this for the world to know. I will not succumb to any trial conducted by any judge or court whose jurisdiction does not pass constitutional muster. Not now, not ever, he said in the letter. Now he says, I have been compelled by the events of the past few days to take the unusual step of writing this open letter for the singular purpose of calling the attention of the general public to the serial executive and judicial fraud being perpetrated against me since my extraordinary rendition in 2021, Kanu said. He recalled that the judgment entered on March 1, 2017. The Federal High Court in Abuja ruled that the IPOB is not an unlawful group. This landmark ruling made by the court before it turned unjust emanated in criminal proceeding that require proof beyond reasonable doubt, and in which the federal government and my humble self presented our perspective cases. And that's instead of the federal government to go on appeal as the law mandated if they are dissatisfied with the judgment. The former Attorney General Abubakar Malami went behind closed door with a letter signed by late Abakria and got IPOB proscribed and tagged a terrorist group in an ex parte proceeding conducted without notice to me or to the IPOB. See the injustice? The abominable incident was the earlier sign yet that the government and its judiciary have struck an unholy and fraudulent alliance to deny me my rights and thereby imperil the lives and liberty of millions who identified with IPOB. He further recalled that on October 26, 2022, a federal high court declared his extraordinary rendition and detention as unconstitutional. According to the IPOB leader, the court stated that the manner of arrest and detention of the applicant Nnamdi Kanu in Kenya, his continued detention in Abuja, his subjection to physical and mental trauma by the respondents, the inhuman and degrading treatment meted out to the applicant amounts to a brazen violation of the applicant's fundamental rights, the dignity of his persons, and threat to his life under the Section 34(1)(a) of 1999 Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria as amended, he quoted the court as saying. He noted that the court further ordered the Nigerian government to apologize to him and pay him compensation. Kanu said, in a responsible and well-ordered society run by a responsible government, this judgment is sufficient to have ended my lengthy detention and encourage the federal government to constructively engage me on the issues of self-determination that triggered the whole saga. Now, out of the article, you see, Nigeria is a place where you can have different kind of judgment in one particular issue. The Nnamdi Kanu case is something that, you know, opens up on all these things. The Federal High Court in Enugu, in Abia, in Abuja before gave a different judgment. Overnight, after giving the same judgment, they have a party order from the same court from another judge again. As in, all these shenanigans supposed not to be happening now. It doesn't happen anywhere in the world. So sometimes these are the reasons why people look at Nigeria and see Nigeria like a place where people who don't obey law finds very good, very comfortable to live, because law don't work in the country. Now Nnamdi Kanu continue to say that on October 13, 2022, the Court of Appeal held that courts must never shy away from calling the executive to order when they resort to acts of executive lawlessness. Quoting the Court of Appeal, he said, the duty of the court is to maintain a balance between ensuring the law and order is obeyed and the protection of the individuals from oppressive actions by the executive. By the forcible adoption and extraordinary rendition of the appellant, Nnamdi Kanu from Kenya, to the country, on the day of June 27, 2021, in violation of international and state laws, the lower court, or indeed any court in this country, is devastated of jurisdiction to entertain charges against the appellant. That is what the Court of Appeal said when they discharged him acquitted, that by the virtue of kidnapping this man down to Nigeria, no court has the jurisdiction to try him, and that is how it's supposed to be now. Kanu noted that despite the clarity of the appeal court judgment and his comportment with reason, the Nigerian government refused to release him from detention. If went behind closed doors and connived, it went behind closed doors and connived with the three other justices of the Court of Appeal who fraudulently and swiftly sat on appeal over the judgment and practically destroyed it by issuing what they term a stay of execution, he added. One day, one may ask, is it not abominable for court to stay a judgment the government already disobeyed? He said. Now, let me stop the article here. The article continues. You know, the later Nnamdi Kanu wrote continues. I will drop the link for you to see. I'll drop the link on the comment section. But all his statement and what he's trying to, the message he's trying to pass is obvious. Okay? It's obvious. The federal government are not trying Nnamdi Kanu. They are persecuting him. So they are just trying everything, all possible means, just to make sure that they kill the man. But it's not going to happen, okay? What we are seeing is not just judicial rascality, but the executive rascality. And don't blame the federal government alone. The Igbo leaders are very well responsible for all these things going on, okay? But let's see how it goes. I think the detention of Nnamdi Kanu needs a new strategy, okay? Anyone who wants to support Nnamdi Kanu to make sure that he got justice, and it needs a new strategy. People need to re-strategize and know what to do. But Nnamdi Kanu is not bothered as far as the right thing is not being done. According to him, I do rather die in detention than to face a biased judge or a criminal court. Let me know what you think on the comment section.
Da muke kira don girman Allah a raba Najeriya. Don girman Allah a taimake mu a raba Najeriya. Mu ina magana da yawun musulmi kuma ina magana da yawun 'yan arewa. Mu a matsayinmu na musulmi ba mu da bukatar zama da inyamurai. Ba mu da bukatar zama da inyamurai. Ibo ba abokin zama bane, ba mutanen arziki bane. Bare in ba ku misalai kaɗan don mu wuce. Ka duba ka ga yadda mutanen da suke arziki a ƙasanmu. Ba yi magana a ce wani hate speech, ko ba ka ke cewa ba wai hate speech. Ai mu speech ɗin kawai muke yi, su kashe mu suke yi. Kwanan nan aka kama Ibo yana yin muryar Fulani yake yi, yana kashe mutane da sunan Fulani. ba mu ba, Takumbo Asari ya fito ya ce babu wani bafulatani da yake kashe mutane a ƙasar Ibo. Ƙarya ake, me yasa su fulanin ba su kashe su ba, me yasa kadai ƙasar Ibo suke kashewa? Ba gaskiya ba ne, wannan wani sharri ne, in ji shi fa, wani sharri ne da Ibo suka kulla. Ba mutumin da yake da greediness, tsabagen son zuciya kamar Ibo. Duk inda ka zauna da shi sai dai ya cuce ka kafin ku zauna lafiya. Wannan yasa ba mu da bukatar zama da su. Sun cika Kano, sun cika Katsina, ga su a Sokoto, sun cika Abuja, ga su a Naija, ko ina Ibo sun cika, amma su ba ka zama ganin su ka zauna lafiya. Mun yi wannan kalubale kuma muna ƙara yi, a gwada mana wata kasuwa guda ɗaya wadda aka gina a ƙasashen jihohin Ibo, wanda musulmi ɗaya ke da shago, wanda ɗan arewa ɗaya ke da shago. Idan akwai a nuna mana, muna son a nuna mana wani musulmi ɗan arewa da yake zaune a ƙasar Ibo yana zaune lafiya, a nuna mana shi. Kinan babu. Waɗannan mutane menene amfanin zama da su? Muna kira ga gwamnati a yi tsarin da za a yi don Allah a raba mu da Ibo, a raba mu da Inyamurai, su kama gabansu, mu kama gabanmu, a zauna lafiya. Irin wannan kisa da suke mana, kisan gilla, a nuna mana yaran mu kwance cikin jini, muna cewa mabiya su yi haƙuri. Wallahi akwai radda za mu sako su mu ce ku koya musu hankali. Ƙasar ta daɗe bata watse ba, idan ku gwamnati ne sai ku gwada mana a ranar ku gwamnati ne, kenan akan mu kuke gwada ku gwamnati ne. Wai ana cewa unknown gunmen sunansu kenan, 'yan bindigar da ba a san su ba. Wallahi mu ma muna iya ƙirƙiran 'yan bindigar da ba a san su ba. Domin me abin da aka ce karen bana maganin zoman bana, to kaji haka karatun yake. Wannan abin da ake yi ana sane, gwamnonin Ibo, gwamnonin jihohin Ibo suna sane, da gangan suke bari ana kashe mutanenmu, da gangan suke bari, suna sane. Duk wanda ya ce ba sani ba ƙarya yake yi, sun sani. Gwamnatin tarayya tsoron su kuke ji ko yaya ne? Idan faranmu ya ɓaci, al'amura za su ɓaci, kuma dole mu ga mu gaskiya. Ku kuma 'yan arewa, musamman manyan arewa waɗanda suke fama da mugun munafurci, wai mutum bai san Allah bane ar-Razzaqu, wai idan an rabu ba mu da man fetur. Man fetur din menene ko man fetur? Ana magana imani, kana magana man fetur, saboda kai baka san Allah ba. Mu ɗauka ma ba mu da man fetur, sai me? Su kawo man fetur su saida mana, mu saida musu akuya, mu saida musu bunsuru, mu saida musu rago, mu saida musu shanu, mu saida musu masara, mu saida musu wake. Ciniki ba haramun bane. Idan Inyamuri zai shigo yankin mu sai yayi biza, idan muka kama shi ba biza mun nakaɗa mai ɗan uban kashi. Wallahi haka za a yi. Ba mu da buƙatar zama da Inyamurai, kuma ko kun kira mu so 10 kun ja kunnen mu, haka za mu gaya muku. Na san kuna jina. Mu ba mu buƙatar zama da Inyamurai, muna fatan a raba Najeriya, kowa ikama gefensa. Ba mu buƙatar zama da Inyamurai. Idan ko ba haka ba, ku tsawata musu akan kashe mutanenmu, wallahi za mu ɗauki mataki. Amma wallahi ba za a ci gaba haka ba. Yanzu nan bayanin da ake mana a majalisar limamai a nan Lafai ta jihar Naija, Lafai ina ce? Tsakiya arewa ce. Aka samu Inyamuri ya kama yarinya musulma, ya kai ta ɗaki kwana 3, ya kwalkwala idanunta, ya kwalkwala farjinta, ya ainihin kashe ta, yanke hannunta. Ya jama'a, yanzu don Allah, idan aka samu bahaushe ɗaya ko musulmi ɗaya a ƙasar Ibo ya kama ɗiyarsu, ya yanke mata idanu, ya mata ta'addanci, ya kuke ganin za a ƙare?
This is the end of our news update. Please click the icon on the top right corner of your screen to watch my next video. You will enjoy it. I will see you again in my next update. Enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye for now.